Thank you, Ambassador Chung, for that really inspiring speech. I'm sure as the Harvard community, we would like to have you as an honorary member if you are still wishing to join us like that. I now invite Kandeban Balendran, President of the Harvard Club of Sri Lanka and co-chair of Big Bold Brave, Harvard's APAC Regional Conference, for a fireside chat in conversation with Her Excellency Julie Chung.
First of all, thank you. You are truly a great friend and an ambassador of Sri Lanka. Please give her a big round of applause, Ambassador Julie Chung. Thank you for joining us. How do you do it? Energy, passion, love, and friendship. From 2022 to now, it's been 2 years. You are here during the hardest time, the toughest time people have gone through, especially COVID, the world's economic crisis of Sri Lanka. During your time in Sri Lanka, you have seen the country face significant economic challenges. However, you have also seen our people bravely come back from the abyss. What are some of key opportunities that you see for the future economic prosperity?
Thank you for that question. You're right, Candy. In the past couple years that I've been here, I mean, you can't imagine this now. We had fuel queues around the block for kilometers to just get gas. We didn't have enough fuel in our cars. We couldn't leave our homes. We had to work from home. I didn't go to the embassy for my office work. So a lot of people had food insecurity problems. And to go from that to now, it's been quite a transformation. And I see a couple areas of opportunity and how they can continue on this path of progress. One is the leadership, right? From the central bank governor to the finance secretary to the energy minister. There have been some really amazing policy decisions to try to put the country's macroeconomic stability back on track. That is no small feat, reducing inflation, really making sure that the decisions that are made now, the reforms made now, as some of them as unpopular as they are, really look at the long-term structural things that really must change in this country and to get rid of its bad habits, as I said, financial bad habits, macroeconomic policies, to get back on track. So I'm really optimistic about that trajectory and the steps that have been taken by the government leadership so far. And that's a good step forward. Secondly, I've really seen a resurgence of civil society, private sector, and others speak up and use their voices in a way that we haven't seen in many years. I think during the big protest events of 2 years ago, people came out of all ages, backgrounds, economic backgrounds to say, we demand accountability and transparency. And those thoughts, those principles still remain today, so that we see a robust civil society. We see robust business associations that want to say in the stake of the future of their country. And I think it's important more than ever that those voices are allowed to speak and have the freedom of expression to speak. So I'm also emboldened to see that the diverse stakeholders in this society have come out in a more courageous way, in an open way, to want to be a part of that solution of the steps going forward. And then finally, I'm really optimistic about the youth, the young people. As I've traveled around the country, met young people, we have 5 American centers around the country, in Jaffna, Batticaloa, Kandy, Matara, here in Colombo. The young people really want more. They want a vision, and they don't want to sit back and just let things happen to them. They want jobs. They don't all want to migrate. They want to stay in Sri Lanka and make Sri Lanka strong and prosperous. And for these youth, what can be done to help enable them and make them strong? So we do a number of programs for youth empowerment, entrepreneurship, English language training, and to really enable the young people, the next generation, to step forward to be more of a player and not sit passively. So I think those are some of the indicators that we see positive movement happening in the country since the crisis of 2 years ago. And if, again, political governance and economic governance both are addressed and stay on track, there could be a lot more potential for progress.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks for friends like you helping us to to take our vision forward to build a dream Sri Lanka for many, many youngsters there. So the second question is China, opportunity to some, threat to others. There's a perception, right? Your thoughts on China's role in the region, especially Asia-Pacific region?
Yeah, obviously China has a major role in the global community. It's economically region, economic, political roles. We work with China in the international community. We find areas of mutual interest, and we have to work together. We work together on climate change. We work together on law enforcement, countering terrorism. Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen is in Beijing right now. So we're trying to forge all the areas where we have those similar interests, mutual interests, to help build a global community that's responsible players for all. Now, when it comes to Sri Lanka, whether it's China or any other country, it's Sri Lanka's responsibility to forge a relationship with any country that serves its interests, right? So even though the majority of the Sri Lanka's debt is in the hands of private bondholders, the majority of its bilateral debt is actually held by China. China is its biggest bilateral creditor. So when you think about the kind of credit, the kind of loans that Sri Lanka has taken from the PRC, and what the economic returns are, whether it's on substantively, have those economic returns been beneficial to the people of Sri Lanka? That's something that the people and the government have to think of. Does it meet environmental standards? Does it meet labor standards? Is it really good for the Sri Lankan people? I mean, there's a number of projects that are, doubtful in that field, whether it's really the choices that Sri Lankan people wanted or its politicians wanted. So I think moving forward, it's important to look at China in the whole sphere of Asia Pacific and the global community. We have robust trade and investment with China. We have a lot of areas of common interest. We want to work together with the PRC, and we would encourage every country to do so. But as you do so, make sure you do that on your own terms, looking at your own sovereignty, and making those decisions that really make Sri Lanka a strong, reliable partner with the entire global community.
Thank you. We have a couple of friends from China and Southeast Asian region as well. We also have many friends here from India. And we have the former Invest India Managing Director, Deepak Bagla, offering the keynote speech yesterday. We see India's economic trajectory. We also see some people having concerns over growing nationalism, right? What consequences do you foresee these two factors having for the region?
I mean, look at what Prime Minister Modi has done in India for the past few years, really raised the level of its role in the global community. It hosted G20 last year. India and US share a very strong friendship and partnership. It is Sri Lanka's closest neighboring partner in the region. And during the economic crisis, India really came in really big with billions of dollars in assistance to help Sri Lanka during that point of crisis. So I think it's important to look at, again, India, like we do with China, of who are the countries that Sri Lanka is going to relate to, and how are you going to attain the best relationship that's of mutual interest. I have seen a bit of nationalism here, sometimes to one extreme or the other, whether it's towards India, the China, United States, or any other country. And there seems to be sometimes protectionist tendencies as well. And I think to really look at the global community now, you have to think about Sri Lanka's role. Sri Lanka's role beyond the immediate, Sri Lanka's role beyond the next 5 years. How do you fit? How do you relate to countries as big as India or China? But how do you also form a new trajectory forward that really asserts your own sovereignty and identity? So what I've heard before, again, some people say is, oh, we don't want to be caught in the geopolitical tussle, right, strategies and geopolitical fights between different countries. Well, why take that passive view? Why let yourself be led by any geopolitical objectives? I think Sri Lanka has really a potential to step in, to step up, to play a bigger role, to note that it is a player in the Indo-Pacific just as much as the others. even though it's a smaller country. I mean, as I said, the maritime sea lanes are so critical here. The ports are so critical here. And again, has joined that Operation Prosperity Guardian to safeguard the channels of shipping. Take on that responsibility and be proud of that. And take on the best of what you can do with India and China and any other country. It's very important to look at that responsibly and to lean into Sri Lanka's own role. I think that has not been done. I think Sri Lanka punches above its weight, and sometimes it doesn't have the confidence to really step into that role. So it's important that it continues to do so, but it's got to get its own house in order, and that's why the current reforms on IMF reforms are so important. Get its house in order, get the economics right, get the governance right, and then there'll be so much more potential to play a more leading global role.
Thank you for that insights. A country is only as strong as its institutions. And institutions plays a huge role in the development or the future building of a country. Given your experience in Sri Lanka and working with people, you have worked with youngsters, you have worked with great institutions, your focus in helping Sri Lanka to move forward, what are some of your insights into strengthening institutions and the opportunities and challenges that countries face on the path of institutional growth? What's your view on that?
Yeah, institution building, institution strengthening is important, whether you're here, or the United States, or any country. Without that institution, then it's just about individuals, and then you get into the cult of personality. It shouldn't be about an individual or a person or a political party. It's got to transcend beyond that. And I think sometimes we tend to fall into that trap of not thinking about how do we strengthen those institutions so that we have due process, checks and balances. So while the United States has given humanitarian assistance during the crisis, including $40 million in fertilizer, we've contributed to the school lunch program to fight food insecurity for school children, most of our assistance and engagement here is not actually geared towards humanitarian assistance. It's more towards that institution building, because we want to provide the tools so that Sri Lanka itself can have the know-how to build its future. And some areas of this is SRE reforms. How do the experts get the expertise, the advice, the technical assistance to know how to even start with those kind of reform processes? How do we help the renewable energy sector build its procurement processes, to build its legal framework so that companies will want to come in and invest here? As I said, we don't drive our US companies. We can't command them to come to Sri Lanka or any other country. But we want to help build the capabilities of the institutions here. That means legal frameworks, independent medias, auditors, journalists. All those institutions in itself have to be strong and strengthened even more than it is now. So I think that goes the same for the United States as well. We want to make sure no matter what political party comes to power, what happens in our elections or elections here, as long as the institutions are strong and we go beyond individual politics or political parties, those will be enduring. And I think that's the importance of institutions that we really need to focus more on.
Great. So before we take a couple of other questions, a fun question to end our conversation. There are some people in the audience who are traveling or travel Sri Lanka for the first time, including some of the folks of our core team members. If there are three things, I know you are a ardent fan of Sri Lankan food, culture, you are a fashion icon on your own as well. Three things that you would tell them that they have to see in this visit, or at least next time.
It's really hard to narrow it down to three. There's so many things here, so diverse. By the way, the tourism campaign right now in Sri Lanka is you'll come back for more, right? Because you can't just come here once. You can't possibly see everything. So I actually love that campaign logo of Sri Lanka, you'll come back for more. As I did when I was a tourist here, 12 years ago, almost 12 years ago, I came as a tourist from Thailand. Never did I think I would be coming back as the ambassador. And I hope to come back even after my term ends because there's so much to explore and see here. But at the top of my list, I gotta say Sri Pada, Adams Peak. Wonderful hike up there. I did that a couple of months ago. You start at 2 in the morning and you go up and then in time for the sunrise. And it is the most amazing, spectacular thing I've ever seen in my life. So I really highly recommend, if you're able to do so, hike up to Sripada, where you see the temple and the shadows of the temple against the mountains. It is magical, nothing short of magical. So I would put that as number one. Have you done Sripada? Yeah. Okay. I've asked a couple of Sri Lankans when I go to events and meetings, and not all Sri Lankans have actually gone up Sripada.
But definitely not at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
That's just wow.
And then the second is also a climb, but it's, everybody goes to Sigiriya, which is amazing. The Sigiriya also, the mountain. But across from Sigiriya is another mountain called Pidurangala. It's a hill, really more than a mountain. It's about a 45-minute hike. But from there, you see Sigiriya. You see Sigiriya rock from another point of view. And that's a lesser-known rock mountain. Everybody just goes to Sigiriya. So I recommend Pidurangala as a second one. And then the third one is really the safaris and the animals. Now, I've been to both Yala and Wilpatu. And Yala can get a little bit crowded with the safari trucks. But my recent visit to Wilpatu was just amazing. I saw a sloth bear, I saw a leopard, and just to be able to see those animals in the wild was tremendous. So I recommend those three, although it's hard to narrow down to just three.
Wow, thank you. So we are going to take 2 questions from the audience. Yeah, can I have the mic? 2 questions. No questions, so...
I've answered all your questions.
Yeah, we have Casey Chu. He was the founder, president of Harvard Club of Singapore.
Thank you. Excellency, at meetings like this, we are all very polite and civilized and won't give you a hard time. But I have to ask you this question. There is and it's not on Sri Lanka, but it's on something that is of concern, perhaps, of people in Sri Lanka and certainly of people in Singapore. And that is what's happening in Gaza. And my question is, why is there such a disconnect between the sentiments of the public in the US that is horrified by the continuing slaughter in Gaza? Why is there such a disconnect between that sentiment and the leadership in the US, the government that you work for, in continuing to support this slaughter? Thank you.
No, thank you for your question. This is not a place to be polite. No, I welcome questions, challenges, dissent. This is what a democracy does. So I actually thank you for raising that question. I get asked that quite frequently. What's happening in Gaza is horrifying. It's tragic. Civilians should not be targeted. Civilians should not be killed. That is absolute. And that's not just something that the public, the United States public, and the protesters are saying. Our government has said that, from President Biden to Secretary of State Blinken. It's a tragedy. And recently we saw, even this week, the World Central Kitchen members, people who are providing food to the Palestinian people, were tragically killed. So there's no doubt that we absolutely oppose this killing of the innocent civilians. And this is something that really needs to be addressed immediately. We've called for a ceasefire. And Secretary Blinken has traveled to the region, the Middle East, multiple times to engage with the Arab governments and Israel. At the same time, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and Israel is in a region where there are countries that want it to be wiped off the face of the earth. So Israel has to take that in mind and that consideration, and its citizens were kidnapped and tortured. But how do we prevent this further violence from escalating is where we're at right now. And how do we do that in a way that we condemn terrorism, but condemn civilian killings as well? So I'm with you on, this is a tragedy. There is nobody who thinks the current events of what's happening in that region are good for the region or globally. We all need to come together for a solution. We're working very hard in the international community through diplomacy, through other actions, through engagement with many governments, including the Israeli government and others, to try to come to a solution, because far too many people have been killed.
One more question from the audience. Rukmani? Yeah, yes.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your kind words, and I was actually excited whether I should call you as a Korean American or a Sri Lankan American, as long as your kind words and how you saw the future of Sri Lanka and how you intend to assist Sri Lanka is concerned. My question is, Your Excellency, now in Sri Lankan population, the gender ratios are concerned, it is 49 the male and the 51% is the female. So as long as empowering the Sri Lankan female community is concerned, it is to the entire audience, not specifically to the Your Excellency, but I would like to hear your thoughts about the gender issues and the empowerment of women in Sri Lanka and its future aspects. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So March was International Women's History Month, the 1 month of the year when we all talk about women's rights and women's issues. And then when April 1st comes, and then it's back to business as normal, right? And I've been to a number of events and sessions in March to talk about women's empowerment, women's equality, women's entrepreneurship, which really should be talking about throughout the year. Now, I'm glad in this room there's a diversity of women, but I've been to so many meetings where I'm the only woman in the room or the only woman at an entire conference, and it is disheartening. And I've encouraged groups, business associations, chambers of commerces to really think beyond. And then when they say, well, there's no women to be brought on, I really doubt that. I mean, you haven't done enough to go, headhunt the capable women that are out there. There can not be a conference on the security of the Indo-Pacific with not a single woman panelist. There are hundreds, if not more, women in this country that can speak to that. So first of all, I think it's important for us to speak out when we see that and make sure that there is equal representation. Because we go to universities here, the majority are women. The majority of graduates here are women. But when you go into the workforce, suddenly in the formal, not informal sector, it's 35%. Why is that? Why does that drop off? Are there cultural issues? Are there childcare issues? Other things that are affecting that? So I think as a nation, both in Sri Lanka, the United States, we all have to work harder at that. And the other thing is level, right? We see a lot of women who are equal in the junior levels, but the higher you go, the CEO level, the ambassadors level, that number also drops. In the United States, we're about 50-50 in the State Department Foreign Service, but why is that the ambassador level, the women's percentage drops to 20%? And that's similar to many C-suite companies as well. So I think we need to think about as a society, as all of our societies, how do we empower, make sure there's opportunity? Now, we've done a number of programs here on women's entrepreneurship, financing for women startup companies and SMEs to give them that support. We just had an event with DFCC Bank the other week where Development Finance Corporation, as part of its private sector financing, gives financing so that the women who want to start businesses have that capability and the ability to do so. And then through the security sector. So, we've given Sri Lanka 3 Coast Guard cutter ships. And we just announced a 4th Coast Guard cutter ship coming next year. Now, what does this enable the Sri Lankan Navy to do? Actually have female Navy officers on board the ship to do operations out at sea, because these cutters are much larger than the ships that Sri Lanka had before. So there are separate spaces for women and men to be on ship together. So we're proud that that contribution of a Coast Guard cutter has enabled women in peace and security and more equality. And last year, I went scuba diving with 3 female Navy divers. First time ever in the history of Sri Lanka, they have had 3 female Navy divers. Why is that? Women can dive just as well as the men. I dive. So I was really heartened to see the Navy commander really lean forward on this women's equality, even in the military security space, and recruit more women, enable more women, give the women the same opportunity as the men in the security forces, civil forces, and the private sector. So I think this is something that we're always challenging ourselves to think about. in our country, but in Sri Lanka as well.
Thank you, Ambassador. Our great friend, Sri Lanka's great ambassador, the United States Ambassador to Sri Lanka, Her Excellency Julie Chung. Give her a big round of applause. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we can now invite the MD of Celeste Daily, Janik, if you can give us 1 second, Janik Jayasuriya, to hand over a token of appreciation. Mr. Janik Jayasuriya, for Ambassador Julie Chung, for all of her time and all of her efforts spent in Sri Lanka. I'm sure we can appreciate the grace with which you handled those curveball questions that were thrown at you as well.